You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network.
Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on. Talking Mondays. Keep moving on. Keep moving on.
Happy Monday. This is Mondays at the Overhead Wire, sponsored by our super generous Patreon supporters. I'm Jeff Wood, your host, and joined by, that's right, every Wookiee's favorite right-hand man. We're Han Solo this week after a month off. First, I wanted to apologize for everybody for leaving everybody hanging for a month. I'm sorry about that. It was my intention to do some Monday shows from China when I was there, but then life and time kind of caught up with me, and I wasn't able to get them together. But since I'm back, I wanted to share a few observations with you all about my experience. That's what this show is going to be about. It will, of course, be observations only about, things that I saw and experienced and whatever happened to me. I'm not going to anoint myself the expert on all things China or anything like that. I can only go based off what I saw and what I experienced. But hopefully it will be a little bit interesting to run through some of what we saw while we were there visiting family. But first, I do want to keep the tradition going and discuss episodes that came and went on Talking Headways and those that are coming up soon. So before we left the trip for a month, last month, I pre-recorded a lot of Talking Headways episodes to make sure that we had them ready before we left. So basically, instead of one episode a week, we were doing 2 episodes a week plus some Monday shows. That was a lot for me to kind of put that together before we left. So I was maybe a little bit of a need of a break anyway. But I didn't have any idea how the VPN situation was going to work or what the internet was going to be like. My in-laws had great internet, which was good, but sometimes the VPN wouldn't let me, get on Google or things like that. Just how it goes when you're going to China. And so since a lot of my news searching stuff goes through Google, that made it hard sometimes if the VPN wasn't quite working. So it was really fun to be there. I wanted to make sure that we had some Talking Headways out there for folks. I recorded those ahead of time, so I wasn't doing recording from a different time zone, and so we did those. And so, we had a few mishaps along the way where I put some shows in the wrong places, and I ended up making that fix. You all didn't see any of that, but it just, things happened. So there's some extra episodes from Spur and Impact that helped us out. First, I want to talk about Spur. Spur actually put on a great session moderated by Laura Tolkoff, and they actually let us take that show and put it on the podcast for the 48 minutes that was on. And they discussed how they put together the most recent push for saving transit in California from the fiscal cliff. It's a must listen for all the advocates, and I hope folks get a chance because there's some really great stuff on there, especially how they did the transit funeral and some other advocacy stuff, how they did some really interesting, connections between all the groups, even before the need for this specific discussion about funding happened. So really great discussion about advocacy and transit funding at the state level. On March 21st, we released an episode featuring Heidi Simon of Smart Growth America, discussing their lessons from Complete Streets Leadership Academies, where they got local officials and advocates on the same page as state transportation officials to do quick build projects on streets. So there's tons of lessons from that one for folks who are interested in doing safety projects and street design projects, complete streets, those types of things. Really great discussion with Heidi, and I hope folks get to check out the report in addition to the episode. March 14th, we had an episode with vehicle designer Dan Sturgis. Dan has been a friend for a long time, and he discussed his book Near to Far, a design for new and equitable transportation system. Dan is really in the weeds about trying to rethink vehicles. He designed the GEM car. So I don't know if you all are familiar with that, but those little electric vehicles that run around cities these days, and they had to get regulations changed to allow those to be on city streets and things like that back in the day when he invented that car. The company got bought out from him at some point, but they're still actually producing them, so they're out there. And so if you see a GEM car, you have Dan to thank. And he went to school for vehicle design. He worked for some car companies, but he figured out that he wanted to be part of the solution for active transportation and reducing VMT and those types of things. So really interesting discussion with Dan, and hope everybody gets a chance to listen to that one. On March 7th, we released the Impact one-on-one conversation on public sentiment and public transit, a really interesting episode. Adelie Legrand and Scott Wilkson had that one and discussed between them about that topic, and hopefully folks get a chance to listen. Also listen to the Impact Podcast, where yours truly is a host. I know some of those episodes show up later on Talking Headways, but you can get them early. They come out usually the first Thursday of the month at the Impact Podcast, and so then we post them maybe here on Talking Headways feed, maybe about a month later. But if you want to get them early, you can go at that point and get them on the Impact feed, wherever you get your podcasts, of course. And then on February 29th, we released an awesome episode with Aaron Breitwar of Comet Skateboards, all about using skateboards for transportation, which is a totally different animal than using them for tricks and those types of things. So I learned a ton from that episode. We don't talk about skateboards as much and in terms of active transportation, but perhaps we should after listening to what Aaron had to say. So really great episode. So a bunch of great episodes came out while we were gone. I'm sorry there were no Mondays episodes while we were gone, but we also have some really great episodes coming up. We're going to talk with Megan Kimball about her new book. We've got Jarrett Walker coming on and talking about his re-release of Human Transit, which is going to be a really fun episode. And then we're also this week talking to Gabe Klein about electric vehicle charging too. So got that set up, and hopefully we can make that happen. So really looking forward to sharing those episodes with you coming up. And so really, really excited about that. And hopefully we have some really good stuff that you all want to listen to after we came back from our longish break. So we continue. I think episode 500 is coming up sometime in July, and I'm trying to think of big things to do for that one. But hopefully we can figure something out, which would be really great. And so anyways, lots of episodes, lots of stuff to talk about. And as always, we want to thank everybody who's been ordering Buster Bike scarves. Somebody ordered one right before I left for China, which was really fortuitous, because that was great that I could actually get that to the mailbox before we left and were gone for a month without access to the scarves. But if you want to order one, thanks so much for ordering. We'll give you, if you order more than 5, actually, we'll give you a 25% discount for listening to the Monday show. Email me at theoverheadwire@gmail.com. We really appreciate that. And we really appreciate those who want to support the show in any way. So even if you're on a Patreon member, you can do so by, we've got the scarves, we've got the bookshop site, and the Cars Are Cholesterol t-shirts. You can also subscribe to the newsletter as well. Also, listening to the ads before the show, as well as the show in general, helps too. So there's a lot of ways to support the show. And of course, listening to the show, you all appreciate the content that comes out. And if you're here listening to this far, I know if you Monday's listeners, we're a little bit nerdier maybe. So hopefully, you get that love and appreciation for just the content as well. So thanks a lot for listening. I really do appreciate it. It's been really awesome, doing this show for, oh my gosh, since 2013 is when Tanya and I started Talking Headways. And so we've been doing it for over 10 years, and it's been a joy and really great to talk to folks about all the topics we talk about. So thanks so much for supporting and being here and listening, and tell your friends. It's hard to express how much appreciation I have for listeners, but also for, in order to grow or in order to keep going, we need to get more listeners too. So I know some folks retire and drop off, or they have other priorities, but we also get new listeners too. So with the death of Twitter and things like that, it's getting harder and harder to get the word out about it. But we do our best. And so tell your friends if there's a great episode, share on social media if you can, and we really, really appreciate it. So, as I mentioned, bookshop.org/shop/The Overhead Wire. If you want to get one of the Cars Are Cholesterol shirts or any other merch that is related, mugs, stickers, things like that, you can use bit.ly/Cars Are Cholesterol. We really appreciate it. Okay, this is episode 149. We're live and in session. Before we get to that show, I want to let folks know that they can get this podcast or Talking Headways wherever you find your podcasts, including iHeartRadio, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Cast, and of course, Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate you listening and subscribing and coming back each week. Also, if you feel so inclined, as we mentioned before, leave a review on iTunes. We've had a lot of awesome reviews on there, but it's been a few years. So if you get a chance, we'd love your feedback. I haven't checked it in the last couple of weeks, but I'll go do that after this, and then we'll have an update maybe for next Monday's show. So with that being said, so I usually this is where we go through the news, right? And we have lots of news that we missed because it was a month of news, and I have all of those bottled up. And also, if you follow us closely, you'll know that we do kind of a review news. We do a best of newsletter on Fridays every week for subscribers paid for the newsletter, but then we also do one for Greater Washington, Streets.mn, and Urban Milwaukee. They syndicate a column that I write about some of the interesting news that happened the week before. And so if you see some of those, we often cover a few of those items here on the Monday show. So if you missed some of the news, some of the popular news that was going on during the month, you can always go back to Greater Washington or Streets.mn or Urban Milwaukee and find out what we were talking about. You can usually type into Google Jeff Wood, Urban Milwaukee, or Jeff Wood, Streets.mn, or Jeff Wood, Greater Washington. You'll find all the columns that we've written since, forever. We've been working with Greater Washington forever with that. And so I really thank them for publishing that. But there's some stuff there too. So if you missed some things, there's a couple of best of items that are there that might whet your appetite in the meantime. We'll cover some of that stuff. Obviously, we won't get to all of it because it's a lot of a month is a lot of news, but we'll try to. But this episode, I wanted to talk about China and the trip that I took there with my wife and my daughter to go visit her grandparents. So I don't know. I wasn't sure where to start with this, but I wanted to break the experience up into a few themes. And I'm not going to like announce when the themes switch or anything like that because they're all interconnected to a certain extent. But there's just kind of like the general theme. There's like a urbanism theme, and then there's a transportation theme because there's all that stuff. And then also, if you all follow me on Instagram, you saw that I posted a few things. I posted a few stories from subway stops and things like that. I also posted some posts that are still like permanent in there too, so you can see some of the pictures I took, especially of multi-use paths, and then also Macau and some other places. So really cool stuff there to share some of the imagery that goes along with this discussion. But I wanted to break the experience up into some themes. And the first theme is the general kind of disclaimer that I'm going to have. And so I want to say first that I know global politics is messy. I know there are things China doesn't like about the U.S. and that the U.S. doesn't like about China, especially from a political standpoint. I went there to visit family, and it was a great experience. I probably would be back more often with my wife and my daughter to visit her grandparents and my wife's friends and her family and things like that. So I plan on going back multiple times and hopefully get even more experience. But people ask me, how I like China because when I was there, because many of them know that most of the kind of the news and the reactions here and a lot of the kind of general feeling about China is somewhat negative in the press, especially lately as it's related to like things like TikTok, right? Or EV promotions. I don't know if you've all seen all this, but electric vehicles are a big deal, in China, and it's subsidized locally, and they're building a lot of new they're trying to go into other markets as well. They're trying to get into Europe, and they're trying to get into Africa and other places. So, the designers and the locals, BYD, for example, is trying to get into those places. So, from a market standpoint. So anyways, trade politics, that's something that, from a U.S. standpoint, it's been kind of negative lately, to a certain extent, talking about, car manufacturing and whatnot versus Chinese car manufacturing or Tesla or whatever it is. In any event, there's also the racism that surrounded the pandemic and things like that. So there's some negative views on China related to that as well. But the people I met and the people that, are my wife's friends and the family that I met, and the folks that I met out and about when I was going to restaurants or taking taxis or whatever else, they're just going about living their lives and doing their jobs, and they don't really, we didn't ever talk about politics. A lot of folks there work very hard. A lot of folks only get one day off a week. We tried to take transit as much as possible, but when we didn't, we took taxis or for hire cars, and the drivers were always super nice. And they there was one time when there was a driver that was a little bit mean, and he was yelling at me because I was getting in the wrong side of the car. It was my fault. Because the door could have gotten sheared off by a big bus, but in the end, he tried to give me his phone to translate when mine wouldn't connect to the internet, and so I appreciated that. So I did something wrong to start with to get him all really mad, and then eventually we kind of hashed it out and were friendly with each other, and he was very nice and liked to ask some questions. So. People are proud of their culture there in China, and whether it's food or the cool things that happen in their cities. We went to dinner with some of my wife's college friends, and they wanted to share the food experiences from Beijing and southern China. And like in the U.S., China is a diverse country with lots of regions and different foods. We were in the South, so it was lots of seafood, but we also ate noodles and street food and all kinds of other good things. I'm honestly really surprised also I didn't gain a lot of weight because we ate so much while we were there, but I also walked on some days 10 to 20,000 steps. So I got my steps in for sure, especially in Macau, which was a really impressive place. And I'll talk about it in a little bit. But so with that said, the politics aside, and I know that folks have opinions about China and what they feel about human rights stuff or whatever it may be. I just want to kind of push that to the side for now, because I just want to talk about the experiences that I had when I was experiencing just being there. So I know those things exist, but I didn't want to belabor them too much. So one of the things I recommend also is, it's not necessarily related to the trip, but this really was great. When my wife and I started dating first, she had me watch this show with her called A Bite of China. And it's all about the different foods in the different regions of China. And like I said earlier, like in the US, every region has its food and its delicacies and things that are interesting and different. And the same with China. It's a huge country with a huge population. And so every region also has its different, the different foods that they have. So in the South, it's seafood. In Szechuan, it's a little bit spicier. In the North, they have noodles and more, wheat-based stuff. In the South, it's more rice-based, those types of things. So I definitely highly recommend watching the show. It'll give you this really kaleidoscopic, introduction to food in the country as a whole. And there's even an English voiceover version on YouTube that I'll share the link in the show notes. But that was really cool and kind of like introduced me to the differences in a lot of the country, because like the United States, China is an amorphous place. It's not a singular entity. It's multiple entities, cities and regions and stuff that are all over the place. So I just wanted to kind of explain that too, that I say I go to China, but I was actually in southern China, and it's like it can be a different place. Even my wife's family, my wife are from northern China originally, but there's like all these different like cuisines and different like people and ideas and things like that I thought were really interesting. So I know, but with that aside, food, etc. I know you guys want to hear about transportation and urbanism, so let's talk about that some more here. So first off, cities. There are a lot of people in China. I am someone who I don't feel like I'm overwhelmed by people generally. I feel like here in San Francisco, it's not the densest city. Like it's not in New York City or anything like that. But there's a density to it that U.S. folks are like, oh, those are tall buildings, or that's people really close together. But that's a different type of crowded than China, at least from my experience. It's crowded, but it's also very vibrant. Tons of street scenes. When you're not in kind of the newer construction areas, the newer parts of the region, you can go to the old towns as well. There's Old Town. We went to Old Town Zhuhai, which is Zhuhai is a city just north of Macau and across the bay from Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and that's where I stayed most of my trip. But going through and walking down the street in Old Town Zhuhai, the street was closed to cars. You could have taken out Christopher Alexander's pattern language books and pointed out all the little patterns in his book and seen it there in Old Town, which is really fascinating to me. From an urbanism perspective, there's lots of little nooks and crannies. There's temples. There's alleyways with restaurants and things like that in these places, and it was really, really cool to see kind of some of that older urbanism in China. There's also the new urbanism as well. The newer development is crazy too. Malls are super popular. I think Alexander Lang would be really interested to go to China and see the mall culture there. It's like if you went back to the 80s, right? If you grew up in the 80s or 90s or the 70s and mall culture and what it was then compared to now. But I feel like I got a sense of that when I was there. The malls are packed on weekends, and it's very Americanized too. The malls that we went to, anyways. I mean, there's tons of shopping spaces and everything else that are outside of that I didn't actually get to. I didn't mean to go to malls; it just kind of happened sometimes. But it felt like back in the 80s, there were people hanging out, there were kids hanging out, going on dates, those types of things. And I know that stuff happens here in malls, but I don't know. It's just, I was really surprised by the kind of the mall culture. And not every mall is international brands. There's all kinds of different places too. Lots of great food options as well. There's amazing amount of food in different places. And usually I'm one that if I go to a new place, I try to look stuff up and find out, what the ratings are and things like that. We did that in Macau a little bit because it's a little bit outside of the jurisdiction. But I had really no wherewithal in terms of, and Google Maps is not, doesn't work basically. And in fact, so if somebody works on Google Maps and is in charge of the kind of the aerial photo to street grid connection, there were a lot of maps in China where they were just off, right? They weren't geo-referenced at all. They weren't connecting. And so I actually had to go use Apple Maps, which seems to be getting better and doing way better than Google Maps. Now, of course, I think Apple's in the country and Google may not be, but that was a really interesting kind of side note as well. Yeah. And so in terms of urbanism too, there's lots of tall buildings, lots of tower blocks. A lot of the buildings are residential that are towers. Here, a lot of the towers and blocks outside of New York City, or maybe Chicago or other large cities like that, they're often like office towers, right? But there it was like a lot of residential towers. And so you see a lot more activity on the streets. You see a lot more people moving around. Where we were in Zhuhai is part of the kind of the greater Pearl River Delta. And so there's a number of cities there like Hong Kong, Macau, Zhuhai, Shenzhen. And basically that whole Delta area, I think Guangzhou is there too, is 80 million people. So if you think about that, so think about California. Like California is almost, I think, like 38 million or something like that. So 2 Californias basically in this region. That's a lot of people. And there's a density and an urbanism that I kind of placed it in context, but I can't really place it in context of places in the United States because there's really nowhere in the US that feels like this. Maybe Manhattan a little bit, but it's not the same. There's this one small area of China is like 1/4 of the population of the US in total. It's on a smaller footprint because all these cities and people have to be there. But Zhuhai was great. It was like it was like a smaller city. It was like 1.9 million people, kind of like an Austin size, like Austin region size, not the city of Austin size, but I think the Austin region's around 2 million people now, maybe, next to these other huge cities. You kind of get a feeling of the scale of things when you can, all those people are in such a small footprint. Macau is crazy too. I mean, it's the Vegas of Asia, right? If you go to Las Vegas, if you go to Macau, you might not feel too different except for the Portuguese influence. There's obviously all the casinos and the Wynn Las Vegas is there and the MGM Grand, and they have all that stuff. And they have one that's like a 1-to-1 replica of a lot of British stuff, Big Ben and things like that. But it's really interesting. They filled in, there used to be 3 islands in Macau, and now there's 2. And 2 of the islands, they filled in between the 2 of them to connect them. And a lot of the Vegas type of stuff is there. But on the main island, it was really interesting. And there's lots of old kind of towns to visit, Portuguese and older, Macau cities. It was a really interesting place to be. And especially from that kind of Vegas standpoint, I was like, not really sure what to expect. The craziest part for me though, was again, the people, how many people there were. There were just people everywhere. And you can see from my Instagram posts, I posted like 2 pictures from Macau where there's really cool neon there. That's one thing that I had noticed, but there's also like a lot of people. And so one of the posts was like, just kind of showing like how many people are on streets and just being there, and also passing through customs and border control, because Macau and Hong Kong are part of China now, but they're also special districts, right? So you still have to, they're still kind of like their own countries, and you still have to pass through control to get there. So the border crossing between Zhuhai and Macau was crazy. And if you're a Chinese citizen, it's really easy. You just have like an ID card and you walk in. Lots of people go back and forth day by day, because a lot of Chinese nationals, work in the casinos and stuff in Macau. Macau is a very, very rich place because of the casinos. But the amount of people they go through is crazy. But if you're an American or a foreigner, you have to go through customs and you have to like show them your passport and stuff. And they can be a little bit of a stickler on stuff. Not like they're trying to like get you in trouble or anything, but it's just like they'll check your passport. They'll look at your face like 5 times, make sure you're who you are. And it takes a little bit longer to get through. So you're standing there for 30 minutes watching this massive people go through customs and border control, which is really fascinating too. So many people. And Shenzhen, we went to Shenzhen. That's where a lot of the new technology stuff's happening. There's a lot of companies there that are doing some really interesting work. It's a big city with a big metro. The metro is amazing, and every stop seemed to be its own shopping mall, every metro stop. They have a huge network, so you can get almost anywhere. I was also amazed at the prices in Shenzhen. Like, we got a hotel room and executive suite, blah, 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 but it was like $200 a night. That was like cheaper than I spent on my hotel room at Impact in Phoenix. And we got like 750 square feet, which is bigger than a lot of apartments in New York City and even here in San Francisco. So that was amazing too. I was amazed at the pricing. Everything's pretty cheap. Food's cheap. The hotel rooms are cheap. The metro's cheap. I think one bus trip was like 10 cents or something like that in American dollars. Is crazy how much cheaper things are. Obviously there's some subsidies and stuff like that, but crazy. And the ferry, we took the ferry to between Zhuhai and Shenzhen and Zhuhai and Hong Kong. And the ferry was great. It was like the Zhuhai terminal is getting a revamp, but the Shenzhen ferry terminal is very nice. You walk in, you know that you're it's a really nice building. It's kind of fancy, like got some of this outside scaling that's really cool and colorful. I think I took a picture of that and shared that too in the Instagram. But that was a really good experience, just hopping on a ferry and going. It was about an hour between Zhuhai and Shenzhen and Zhuhai and Hong Kong. There is a bridge between Hong Kong and Zhuhai that was built, I think, like 2019, right before the pandemic. It was supposed to be a bigger deal, but apparently like the pandemic kind of quieted it down a little bit. But we took the bridge when we got off the plane to get there quicker, and it was pretty good. It's a really long bridge, but it was really good. It's like it's an hour on boat, and I think on the bridge it was like 20 minutes or something, 20, 30 minutes on the bridge between the two. And so, yeah, it's just like really interesting transportation stuff. In Hong Kong, Chinese nationals are only allowed to be in Hong Kong for like 7 days. So they make sure that you're leaving. As an American, it's a little bit different, but we had to go through a number of different ports and number of different passport control things to get to different places because of the different administrative districts that were Hong Kong and Macau and Zhuhai and China and things like that. So it had to cross over a few times. So I spent a lot of time waiting for the border control people to get me through. Yeah, and so Shenzhen was really cool. They had this really cool industrial district that's like kind of an arts district. Lots of interesting buildings and uses. Looked like, basically an adaptive for use area. And then there's a lot of art and things going on, crafts and maker spaces and things like that. Many of which probably if you had NIMBYs, they wouldn't let happen there because the building codes wouldn't let that happen here in the United States. And Hong Kong is amazing in the terms of getting off the ferry and then being in this hyper dense environment. We got off the ferry. The hotel was right above the ferry terminal, and we planned it on purpose because we had these huge bags we were carrying around for getting on the plane back to the United States. But basically, we're on top of this super shopping mall in a hotel on top of a ferry terminal and all connected. We just walked like maybe a couple blocks to the subway to get to anywhere in the region. The Hong Kong in the city anyways, which is really cool. We took the subway a number of times and that was fun. And my daughter learned how to be a strap hanger, which is really cool. But also, it's funny because it made me laugh at some of these density arguments we have in the United States. The density here is negligible. And when people are complaining about high density and worried about a duplex, I just was sitting in that hotel room laughing because it's just like Hong Kong is bonkers and there's lots of people. And I don't think that we'll ever get to that point because that's just not how that's not the trajectory we're on at the moment. Maybe we should be because of climate change or something along those lines, but it just doesn't feel like that we're going that direction. But at the same time, like when people here complain about density or complain about zoning reform or things like that, which are like, oh no, you're going to change the character of my neighborhood by having a duplex or a single family home. It just being in that space made me cringe even more for those folks because it was like, there's no way if you plopped them down into Hong Kong, they'd be like, okay, well, yeah, that's dense. That's crazy. And so it just makes me laugh at those arguments. I don't know why. I don't know why, but I continue to think. I was looking at Twitter in a hotel room a couple of times where I was just like, back in the United States, and people are complaining about stuff like that and density and neighborhood character and things like that. And I was just like, that's crazy. That's crazy, especially going to visit this place that's like super crazy, hyper dense, and so many people living in a small amount of space. 80 million people in this region. 80 million people. That's 2 Californias in this one region. And it's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. And Hong Kong was the most dense, obviously. The metro served it well. The metro served Shenzhen well too, and it has a much more extensive network than Hong Kong actually does. They recently hit a high of 10.25 million riders in March 11th, which is actually the Monday before we went there. And if the thing that's funny about thinking about that is 10.25 million. The 0.25 is actually BART's ridership on a good day, right? And then New York City, I think Yoan and I mentioned that like 4 million was a high watermark there. I think before the pandemic, New York City subway was getting to 6 million people from time to time. So 10 million is a lot of riders. And there were, some of the times that we were on the train early in the morning or in the afternoon, it wasn't too full. But on the weekend, on the crazy high parts, there was a lot of people. And the trains came frequently. I mean, they're, every 4 minutes, every 2 minutes, and it was just like clockwork, right? Just like coming through and really, really going and taking you where you needed to go. And so I was really impressed by that. The headways were really good. The service was really good. they had folks watching. There was a couple of instances in Shenzhen where we had to go through a metal detector and put our bags through like an X-ray machine to get onto the metro. And I guess that's how they deal with safety. But it was really interesting. And the buses in Zhuhai are electric and efficient too. And you can get to most places in the city, in the small city of Zhuhai, 1.8 million people. But it's packed at rush hour, and I'm used to jamming into a BART train. But I think the personal space thing came into my consciousness because there was the first ride I think I had. I was sitting on a seat with my daughter, and there was a kid who kept eating these like cinnamon kind of strips, those gum strips they put on your tongue and it kind of tastes cinnamony. And then he was breathing right in my face. And so it's almost like the scene out of Aliens. That's what I can like relate it to, where the alien is breathing down Sigourney Weaver's neck. And I'm not equating the kid to an alien, but I was just thinking of that breathing in your face kind of thing. That's how close he was to me. I also took the light rail in Macau. There is a new light rail system there that's kind of an automated metro. It's kind of like a SkyTrain or something like that. And they're going to build a larger network. So this was limited in its ability to get people places. And the area is pretty walkable generally. So it was more for like workers and long distance trips. But as soon as they build out that network, I think you're going to be able to get more places on the islands of Macau, and it's going to be more efficient. And there's a big bridge between the North Island and the South Island. And this might actually be more useful if you're trying to get to a hotel in the South Island, or actually the neighborhoods on the South Island as well. But yeah, so I think that will be cool when that's finished. There's lots of walking. There's even some places in Macau that have moving walkways that act as like, escalators do in cities with hills and stuff. So there's actually a covered walkway that took you to Old Town on the older island, where they had the Old Town, and you can go and get food and things like that. Lots of interesting places there, lots of Portuguese history because of that. Apparently it's called Macau because of some mix-up. It's not even supposed to be called Macau, but the Portuguese did something stupid when they got there, so it's kind of a running joke with locals apparently. And we met a lot of really interesting people, a lot of nice restaurants and food and lots of interesting things there as well. The Shenzhen metro, as I mentioned, was amazing. But the thing about that one was like every stop was like a mall, like a serious mall. Like you could go downstairs and you'd have like 3-story mall downstairs underneath a metro stop or above a metro stop. And the rooftops are there, I guess, to allow the retailers to, have that confidence that every stop is going to be able to support a mall. But it was just crazy, the amount of development that was like so close, and you could actually access things. So the hotel we stayed at in Shenzhen like was on top of its own mall, and it was like right next to the metro stop. And then there was a couple of them that had like really big malls that were on top of it. So, and by mall I mean like just like an indoor building with like shops that you can access from a main terrace. There's like a lot of those in these places. So and the Shenzhen metro is built on kind of the Hong Kong model as well, where real estate development is part of their play, where they develop around their stations and either lease the property or something along those lines, and then they get revenue from that, I believe. There's a big Shenzhen metro building on top of one of the stops where we were by. We also went to Gangxia North station, which I had some pictures of. It's a really cool ceiling design. There's 4 lines that pass through there, and the ceiling is kind of like a star kind of looking thing with a portal that goes up to the roof so you can get the sunlight in. That was really cool. And also that, one of the things I think I've heard about, Chinese cities or cities in Asia are like kind of the air quality, but we didn't have too much air quality problems. Apparently a lot of the cities up north have more, but we had some actually really good air quality days, even though it was foggy for most of the day. I think I brought the fog from San Francisco. That was my fault. There was only a couple of sunny days, but everything was pretty great. I'm going to post that station picture on Instagram again. But it was really cool. That's one of the things that the locals were proud of. Like I said, we went to dinner with some of my wife's friends, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you should go see this station. It's really cool. If you like that kind of thing, you should go check this out." And I was like, "Oh, that's great." And then I got to the station. I was like, "Wow, I'd never even heard of this or seen it or anything like that." But they were like, "Oh yeah, that's something cool to see. So check it out." The other thing that was really interesting was the multi-use paths in Zhuhai, in Macau, in China, in Shenzhen generally. There's lots of multi-use paths, and the multi-use just means not a car, right? So There's lots of motorcycles, and they're electric bikes, but they're like mopeds, but they go as fast. They're not like e-bikes or anything like that. They're more like mopeds, but they have a lot of delivery folks, a lot of deliveries, like Uber Eats type of things, where everybody's zooming around on a moped, and then the speed matters, I guess. So you have a set time limit, and so all these guys are speeding up and down the streets. I don't know if I like them, mixing with pedestrians, but they're on those kind of multi-use paths, which are more than sidewalks, but less than like the main road, but it's still pretty substantial. I didn't notice those in Hong Kong though, and they were pretty absent. So it was interesting to see the difference between kind of mainland China and the delivery and the kind of the craziness of that all, and the sidewalks and stuff, versus Hong Kong, which they didn't have any of those. The Hong Kong taxis though, those are really interesting too. They have all these 2000 taxi cabs of Toyota cars. That was really interesting too, to see kind of the history of that and what that means. Like why weren't they switched to new cars, and then they continuously run, and I don't think they have as many Uber or Lyft there either. I didn't look up the details on that, but I saw them everywhere in Hong Kong as well. The one thing I didn't like about Macau and Zhuhai and Hong Kong was the smoking. And the exhaust from diesel. Like electric cars are a big deal, and electric cars, there's a lot of them out there. You can tell because their license plates are all green in China and mainland China. So you can see all of them passing by, which one's electric and which one's not, because their license plates are green. Even the buses, if it's an electric bus, its license plate is green, and if it's not, it's not. So you can see that there's a massive amount of electric vehicles there from a percentage standpoint, especially compared to the US. But I did notice that in Macau, for example, like there's lots of people smoking still, and there's lots of exhaust that was really, really tough to deal with. But walking was really easy. It felt safer too. I didn't always feel safe riding in cars when I was there, when we did ride in cars. But there's also a lot of bollards, a lot of metal barriers everywhere. Some of the streets, they just, it might be a small residential street, but they have a barrier in the middle that's metal that keeps the cars on their side of the road, which was really interesting. I've got pictures of that too. So that was really interesting. The walking and biking looked really safe and really easy, and there's just like a lot of ways to get around. And the subway exits are very well marked. They have labels and good wayfinding. Even if you don't speak Chinese, you can tell that you can get out on level A, B, C, D, or an exit A, B, C, D, and get where you need to go. The maps were really good. Especially in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, it was pretty impressive on the wayfinding, especially. So you could tell where the lifts were, where accessibility was, how to get into the stations and out of the stations and all that stuff. So that was really impressive too. So that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff to kind of cover. There's a lot of transportation stuff, a lot of urbanism stuff. So I highly recommend going to Asia, going to China specifically if you can. The food is wonderful and the people are nice. The transport and urbanism is so much different than here, but it's worth it to see something different. I mean, that's the thing, is like going there and seeing all of the different kind of transportation modes, how cities are built up. It's so different than when you go to Europe. And Europe is kind of, it's a hyper different experience to an American experience from a transportation standpoint, generally when you go to the center cities, but also just kind of culturally, it's different. Obviously, you go to Europe and most folks speak English in a little bit, and it's somewhat familiar, I think, from a Western perspective. But this just added to my imagination of what cities could do or what they could be if they wanted to. And yes, I do realize that building systems and things are much different in China. But we can always learn from places and do interesting and different things and learn from other places to do it. So I'm always all about learning from other places and taking the best practices. Don't take the worst practices, always take the best practices. So lots of really good experiences there. I'm sure I'll have more when I go back in the future. I know that we'll go back, every other year or something like that, or maybe every year, depending on family stuff. But I'm looking forward to it and experiencing some more stuff. I felt I said this in the newsletter, and I felt unburdened when I was there. Obviously there's politics and obviously there's things going on, but it was a nice way to get away from, and I was on Twitter from time to time, but it was a nice way to get away from like the heaviness of American politics, the heaviness of climate change and things like that, because I guess it's kind of like when you go on a vacation, right? I wasn't really on a vacation. I was on for 1 week, but we were there for a month. I worked for 3 weeks while I was there, kind of work from home situation, but I just felt like a little bit more relaxed. And I don't know if that was just because we were around family and that was nice, or if we were just kind of like, I was just being taken around because honestly, I don't know many Chinese words. And so my wife was a saint in doing all the translations and showing me everything, and is definitely worth it to have a translator. I wouldn't go on your own. I don't think it's super navigable if you have to use your phone to translate everything. Having a person there really, really helps. But it was just, I don't know. I'm just going to say this over and over again. It's a great experience. I hope folks get to go. And so that was our trip to China. We'll be back with the regular news items next week, or actually next time we're on the show, maybe in 2 weeks. And hopefully over time, I'm sure I'll have more stories to share as they come up and we talk to folks through the podcast. But I just wanted to share some of those experiences because it was a lot, and I was gone for a month, and I apologize for that. But it was really cool. Okay, this week and every week, I want to thank our generous Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome and keep the show going by listening and supporting each month. This show and Talking Headways really wouldn't be here without it, so thank you very much. And you can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. We've had people sign up each month during the pandemic and afterwards, so we're very appreciative of that. $2 a month will get you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month will get you one of our transportation scarves. Also, I want to mention we did produce an audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic, Town Planning and Practice. And if you want to get your hands on one, go to raymondunwin.com. Listener questions and comments. If you have a comment or question, feel free to tweet at us or comment on any of the social sites where the podcast appears. Feel free to email us at theoverheadwire@gmail.com as well. Thanks for all the notes while we were away. Folks were really into Yona's episodes, and a few of you were mentioning car commercials that showed up before each of the episodes, some of the episodes. So I wanted to chat about that for a second because I know that some of you joked about it, and it is pretty funny that car commercials show up in front of the show. But it seems also like there are a couple of folks that might have been a little bit upset. So honestly, I don't have much control over the ads, with the exception of general categories that Libsyn has for turning on advertisements with them. I have level 1 ads turned on, and so there's like 3 levels. There's like the hardcore stuff that's like you can advertise anything. There's a second level, it's like if you want political ads and things like that, and then there's one which is like a basic commercial level, which I guess the cars fall into. They actually asked me if I wanted to improve to a level 2 so I could make more money. And I said no, because I was like, well, I think that would mean we'll get more car commercials and things like that. But apparently car commercials come in level 1 as well, so I can't really avoid them. But I want to keep the ads as clean as possible. I want to make them, interesting. If it's a Starbucks ad during Christmas, I don't think you mind that too much. And I don't want to bother you all too much, but it does make a little bit of a difference in terms of like revenue for us to do the things that we want to do. And so if there's a Jeep ad in front of the show, I'm sorry, but why don't we just take their money? They don't really know what's going on, and they don't really realize what they're funding, which is the revolution in terms of city planning and urbanism. The revenue that we get from here is actually, and our Patreon supporters is actually how we pay Sophia, our editor, which she's been with us for quite a while, and also pays some of the hosting fees as well. So in a perfect world, I'd be able to choose in fine detail which ads I wanted to share. But at this moment, no one's coming to me with thousands of dollars promoting e-bike rebates or anything like that, which would be nice. So if you got your e-bike rates or your conferences for city planning or whatever else, if you want to come and we'd do some ads, feel free to. But with that being said, it's easy to, if you want to, fast forward through the ads. I try to make them as good as possible, but sometimes I can't really control what happens there. So if it was really offensive, then I would give Libsyn a what's what, because we have done that before where somebody miscategorized a political ad that hated on transportation funding that we wanted, and I told them that was not kosher, and they actually said that was miscategorized and slipped in accidentally. So we'll take them at their word with that. But I try to keep it normal and regular and not offensive if possible. So hopefully folks aren't too upset about the ads. If you want to fast forward through them, that's fine, but they really do help us out in terms of paying for, some of the things that we like to do, and we share the show. So appreciate that. Okay, Puppies and Butterflies. This is the part of the show where we talk about something fun, interesting, or maybe just didn't fit in any of those other sections. Been watching Bad Batch, which is a great, Star Wars cartoon on Disney Plus. Really like that show. We're also approaching May the 4th, so maybe we can put something together from a Star Wars and Cities perspective here on the Monday show. I don't think it's going to be on Talking Headways this year, but maybe we'll get some folks in. I had some interest from some folks to talk about it some more this year who want to be on the show. So maybe we'll get in some Star Wars discussions about cities. And then also, Puppies and Butterflies. My China trip was actually a Puppies and Butterflies, although my sister did get a puppy while we were in China, so that was pretty cool too. But yeah, so the China trip was a really great trip, and hopefully it was interesting for you to listen to me ramble on about it as well. Okay, well, you can find me on Twitter at The Overhead Wire, at TheOverheadWire.com. You can find me on Mastodon at The Overhead Wire, sfba.social. You can find me on Instagram at The Overhead Wire, on Threads at The Overhead Wire. I still haven't gotten to Blue Sky yet. There's so many networks now, I can't keep up with all of them. Obviously, we're on YouTube and other things, but Instagram is where the pictures are if you want to check those out. Thanks for joining us at Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Thanks for listening to me ramble on about China and the trip there. And thanks to our generous patrons for sponsoring this week's podcast. We really do appreciate it. And I hope to see you next time.
Talking